Why do people do what they do? What really moves us and motivates us? John Nash, Executive Director of the ARC of North Carolina, tells us his experiences in this next episode. John Nash grew up in Central California on an 11-acre rural farm. His father was a history and political science professor. So as a kid, he watched every convention and gained his first exposure to current events, although he preferred watching cartoons. John first ventured into chemical engineering major degree, but realized calculus and chemistry was not his strengths. He instead tried international relations, and he found it far more interesting. What happened next in his career and personal life that made him move to North Carolina? What is the goal of the ARC of North Carolina organization where John is currently working? Let's learn about John's journey into advocacy. Hi, John. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Where did you grow up, and how was your childhood like?
I grew up in Central California on an 11-acre small farm. It's the part of California most folks don't realize is there. It's not LA, it's not San Francisco, it's cow pastures and cowboys, really. I mean, roping and rodeos, and I mean, that's pretty much the part of California I came from. Very rural.
Nice. And your schooling was all back there in California. When did you move to North Carolina?
I moved to North Carolina a little over 6 years ago. My formative years were obviously in California. I did my undergraduate in political science with emphasis on international relations at Brigham Young University. And I did my graduate work, earned my master's degree from Fresno Pacific University.
Okay. So as a child or like back in high school, were you interested in politics, or were there any glimpses of, your friends or your relations or anyone who were interested in politics?
Actually, yeah. My father was a political science professor, history and political science. And so, I mean, as a kid, I remember we watched every convention. I remember watching the Watergate hearings with my father. At the time, I was young enough to think this is boring. Can't we watch cartoons? But that was the my world was exposed to an awful lot of current events, what was going on, and not just what was going on, but talking about the whys and the wheres and how that how things fit together.
Oh, nice. And what sparked your interest to find a major in political science?
Well, at the time, I had majored in chemical engineering and realized that getting failing grades in calculus and chemistry and critical things that were important to getting a degree in chemical engineering, that maybe that wasn't in the cards for me. And I happened to take a general education class in international relations, of all things, talking about just some of the basic things that were going on in the world. And I realized, this is far more interesting. And it is, whether it be business or political science, they are all sides of the same coin. I mean, it's about human interaction, what makes people do what they do, why do they do it, and that's always kind of been part of where I'm at anyway. And it seemed to fit. It was a good decision, I thought.
Okay, so you initially were getting a chemical engineering degree, and then you shifted to political science?
I dropped out of chemical engineering pretty fast. Again, failing grades don't necessarily endear me to the professors that I need to be friendly with, and but I did make good friends with the professors in the social sciences and the political science department particularly, and turned out some of them were colleagues of my father, and so it worked out.
Oh, nice. And was there any special course which you liked or which you recommend, who are probably getting a political science degree now? What would you recommend them to take, which would be useful in their career?
Well, that's a hard question, because that's been a lot of years ago. When I did my undergraduate, that would have been the 90s.
Yeah.
Really, anything that deals with human interaction. I mean, a lot of times history and political science is a lot about dates and leastways that's how it's perceived. And really, the coming to understand the human condition. Why do people do what they do? What moves us and motivates us to make the decisions we make that lead to everything we're dealing with right now? Those kinds of courses, some theory courses that I remember taking that were critical to helping me see, wait a minute, there's a lot of different ways of perceiving what's going on. And it's really shaped my understanding of politics and business for that matter, because they really sit on in the same territory. It's about why do people choose what they choose, and how do we help them make the right kinds of choices and influence things in the direction we want them to go.
Yeah. So what happened after you got your bachelor's? It looks like you got a master's in leadership organization management.
Mm-hmm.
So why did you choose that, and how did you get into it?
I had worked for a company in a number of different locations over several years that was what was paying my way through college. I wanted to go to graduate school. I was living in Fresno managing a construction supply company at the time, and this was a get me through college job, and it paid the bills, but it was not what I wanted to be or wanted to be doing. And I happened to cross paths with an individual that was the director of the program at Fresno Pacific on management and organizational leadership. I had left the construction supply company and was doing just some independent consulting, and he and I connected, and I did a project with him, and he said, you ought to be looking at getting your master's degree. And he enticed me to come go through his program, which I did. And so that was really, because it was about community development. It was about management and organization. It was, once again, the human dynamic. How do people interact, and why do people do what they do?
Interesting. And after you finished the master's degree, what was your first stint?
I worked for almost 8 years for the Tule River Economic Development Corporation, which is a private 501c3 chartered by the Tule River Band of Yokuts Indians. And my apologies to anybody listening. I always say Indians. I was told at the time we are the Yokuts Indians, and I was asked to say that and to refer to them that way. And I have very good friends on the reservation and remain good friends with some folks there. They've never told me to say anything different, and I've always been respectful of that. But it was really about developing business, reviewing business plans, building and helping tribe build an economic future with the resources they had, limited at the time, that have grown since, and actually they're doing quite well. But I did that for about 8 years.
So how did you get that position?
I was just finishing up my coursework in my graduate program, and I was feeling like I needed to do something specific, but I wasn't sure what. And I did something I don't usually do. I opened up the want ads in the local newspaper, in the Fresno Bee, and I just happened to see an advertisement for Tule River EDC. It was the last day that the ad was posted. The next day it wasn't in the paper. So that Monday I called the tribal office, and the individual that answered the phone, she told me, she ended up being a very good friend. She says, well, they've kind of closed it on Friday, but you know what, if you send it to me right now, I'll put it in the stack. And I ended up moving to Porterville, California, and spending eight years with the tribe, really working with them closely to develop their economic capacity.
Nice. So was there any specific skill you gained from that 8 years of experience, which currently is helping you out in your position?
Oh, yeah. One of the critical lessons was about understanding relative advantage. Every organization, every business, every group has something that they do better than anything else. It may be that others do it better than you do, but there's something that I am the best at. And if I'm going to succeed, then it's focus on what I'm best at. Again, there may be other people that are better, but rather than focus on things that I'm not best at, I'm going to focus on the things that I do well, and hopefully develop my ability to do stuff on top of that.
True. So what happened after the 8 years experience you had
at the Tule River Economic Development Corporation. What was your next position?
I left there on again, I always leave on good terms, and I left on very good terms with them. The time came when it looked like they needed to be looking in a different direction, and I felt like they needed to. I separated from them. I spent 3 years as an independent consultant doing management organization consulting projects, doing grant writing, a few other things that I was involved with some large clients that I had. And this was just prior to the Great Depression or recession of 2007, 2008. And I remember feeling at the time I could see what was on the horizon. I felt I needed some stability. And one of the board members that had hired me to work for the tribe was the executive director of an agency that provides service for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And he had been a friend and a mentor for a number of years at that point. And he actually approached me one day and said, "Hey, John, how come you didn't apply for the job I've got open?" I said, "Well, I didn't know you had a job opening, and did you want me to apply?" And he says, "Yes, actually, I think I do." And he'd been the exec of that organization for 42 years at that point. And when he retired, basically, I was hired to replace him. And so I spent a number of years there working and working with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that opened up opportunities, and the opportunity came to move to a new state. We needed to leave California. It has to do with health issues. If you're watching where the fires are, that's where all the smoke from all the fires is landing. And that's nothing new to the folks that live in that part of the state. And we just, for health reasons, we need to leave. And so we ended up finding an opportunity doing what I do here in North Carolina for the ARC of North Carolina, which is a state chapter of the ARC. The ARC is a 501c3. I think there are somewhere around 650 state and local chapters across the country. And we're primarily a family-based organization working with families and individuals with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. We do policy work, some services that some organizations do. We do some services. We do a number of different things that are really connected to people with IDD.
Mm. So before you moved here to North Carolina, at your last position as the executive director, did you learn anything there? Any specific challenge you had which you can remember, which you can distinctly say that, yeah, this is something which I learned from? What was a challenge and I learned from it?
Things that I was aware of and that I knew, but began to really put them into play. I mean, previously I'd supervised a lot of people, but not in the numbers. When I got to PSW, which was the company, we had about 200 employees, and a lot of it had to do with, I knew what I thought needed to happen, but to give people enough room, regardless of what I think needed to happen, was to give them room to do it and to learn from it. I could do it all myself, but I'm only one person. You have some limitations. And it's kind of developed some of the philosophies that I definitely lean on today, such as, people have to feel safe to make a mistake. In our business, if something goes wrong, it harms somebody with a disability, and we are very connected to that. And a lot of families, a lot of people with children with disabilities work in this business. I have 2 sons that are on the autism spectrum. So, it's very personal to us. And so we feel like we can't allow failure. And yet failure is where we grow and we learn and we gain our most understanding. And again, learning firsthand with a large group of people how to focus their efforts and their energies. Certainly understanding the rules of nonprofits and how nonprofits operate on a larger scale. But generally, again, giving people some room to make it. It's about learning how to be a coach, where I'm not going to be the one doing the work that needs to happen. I need to coach you so that you know how to do it. And I need to encourage you to find somebody to mentor them the way I was mentored, so that there is always a following group of people to step in when the time comes. All of us at some point will depart from whatever group we happen to be aligned with, just because that's part of nature. Who's going to step in behind me if the organization falls apart because I'm not there? Then shame on me. If, on the other hand, we've got good ideas and we taught people to understand how those ideas work and can step back and they can not only take those ideas and implement them, but they can put their own stamp on it. That's when my organizations really thrive and really do well. And that's really kind of came out of that experience, and it's followed me, where I'm at now.
Mm-hmm. So, as the executive director at PSW, was that the first time you started doing your tasks in policy watching, or was it even before that?
I did some, because we were really heavily involved in federal policy when I worked with the tribe, and learning how to navigate federal bureaucracies and the federal environment. When I got to PSW, I was, I'd always been involved and interested in, state and local and federal policy and legislation. But at that point, I was very heavily involved in helping to craft policy and, doing legislative visits. I was 3.5 hours from Sacramento at the time, so it wasn't always an easy thing to do, but we ended up spending, several times a year sitting down with legislators and helping them work through, and certainly working with our local legislators to move the dial on things that were critical to us. Again, I did some of that with the tribe, but it really became a major portion of my work when I started with PSW. Of course, coming to North Carolina, that is a huge piece of what goes on with in this particular role. And again, just looking for ways to help enhance the world that somebody with IDD lives in, and how to help politicians. And really, a lot of the work is educating somebody, and, legislators, administrators, helping them understand IDD and how that affects the world, and really give them a perspective on who they're dealing with and how large this community really is, because it's a very large community.
So, so were you a registered lobbyist in California?
I was not a lobbyist. We had lobbyists that worked for us. I was on I was part of an association where I was on the policy team pretty much the whole time I was with PSW. That started early on, and was, again, kind of get the same group of people, so we all kind of knew how to interact with each other. I was too far away to be there to worry about needing to be a lobbyist. Here in Raleigh, I can go, I'm, 10 minutes from the General Assembly offices. I can be there and am frequently during session when the need requires. Couldn't always do that in California. It was, 3.5 hours is a little bit further to go for a quick commute.
Yes. So now your position as the executive director of ARC of NC,
Mm-hmm.
You did give us some background as to, what your organization does. Is there anything which you can say, if, let's say, a layman comes in and say, like, okay, what does your organization do? Can you explain that to them as to, what is the
Sure.
role of your organization?
First and foremost, we secure for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities the opportunities to choose and realize their dreams of where and how they learn, live, work, and play. That's the official mission. And when you boil that down to its core components, it's about securing choice and opportunity. And that's primarily an advocacy role. It's not my choice and my opportunity, but the opportunity of somebody with Down syndrome to live independently. We provide a great deal of services. We have people that work in people's homes. Some folks need somebody there 24/7, others maybe only occasionally. But we have people that work in the homes with families and with individuals. We provide guardianship when somebody is adjudicated by the courts to be incompetent. They're not able to make their own decisions. Not only do we provide that decision-making role, but we are actually one of the in North Carolina, we restore rights to people who, again, some famous cases. One where a young lady had Down syndrome, and her parents wanted to be able to make her decisions for her. And she said, I want to live independently. And she petitioned the courts and sued her parents, and won. And not only won, but convinced her parents that this was the best thing to do. And her parents became very supportive of it. She can make her own decisions. She can live independently. She needs a little bit of help, but that doesn't mean that all of her decisions need to be made for her. And so we do a lot of that type of work, restoration of rights. We own housing. This goes back 35 years. We own about 2,600 apartments, group homes, condos scattered across North Carolina, specifically for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental illness. It's actually one of the largest providers of low-income housing for HUD. We're a HUD organ. We work with HUD on all these in the nation. We do a lot. I didn't know that until a couple of years ago, that this is a very large portfolio for people with, specifically for people with disabilities and mental illness. So we provide that housing, but first and foremost, we are an advocacy organization. We do outreach and education. We recently connected with fetal alcohol syndrome disorders, spectrum disorders here in North Carolina, because that is the one intellectual disability that can be prevented just by not drinking during pregnancy. Others are, I mean, it happens. It's nothing you can do to prevent Down syndrome or autism. It happens. And so we do a lot of outreach and education, helping parents understand what their rights are, helping individuals with disabilities understand not only their rights, but what kinds of things are available to them. And certainly policy becomes a part of this, because not only do we explain to people with disabilities and their families, these are your choices and your options, but we can also help influence Medicaid policy, education policy, justice policy, and hopefully make things work a little bit better for somebody with a disability who has, for all intents and purposes, is a part of our community, but sometimes we don't recognize that. We don't see them in the roles that they really could and should play.
So can you give us an example of any major policy you guys worked on or advocated for in this past session or in the recent session?
In the past session, Medicaid was transformed into, for what it's worth, it's managed care at this point. And Medicaid is physical health, but it's also behavioral supports and habilitative supports. For us, it's habilitative. We're not trying to change somebody's behavior. We're trying to teach somebody with a disability how to live in the world that they live in, how to navigate our society with sometimes limitations that whether it's cerebral palsy or it's an intellectual disability, there's a lot of things that may influence life. In the last session, we were working on solving a problem that occurred, 11, 12 years ago now, that put people who lived in group homes in jeopardy of losing their home, because the funding that used to support them was moved into a different category, and the new category excluded them. And this has been something we've been working on for a long time. We were close to getting that passed, and then things got shifted around. The COVID pandemic hit. In the middle of that, we did get some money for housing for COVID supplies. We got about $5 million for people that operate these group homes. Sometimes these are small agencies. They may have, 1 or 2 homes that they operate, a total of 8 to 12 people that they work with, that they support in their homes. To have to come back and buy personal protective equipment, and that's an expense that the system doesn't support, and their margins are so close. How do we make that? How do you make ends meet and stay safe and meet all the requirements and regulations? And so that was a very big success. And we've done things over the years. There's a thing called an ABLE Act, which is like a 529 savings account. But it's for people with disabilities that keeps them from losing their benefits, while at the same time giving them incentive to save. Their benefits are tied to their income. So if you have too much income, you lose your benefits. This helps them avoid that and helps them really do what we're trying to do, which is, build for the future. And so we've been heavily involved in, you pick the policy. If it has anything to do with autism or a disability of any kind, typically the ARC, along with several others, we're usually right there in the middle of talking through what are the issues and how do we help move this along. The last session, certainly there was a lot of things going on that affect, the short session is correct issues from the long session, make budget adjustments in the long sessions where things really start to move. But in the middle of the short session, we ended up with a pandemic that really, really kind of changes everybody's perception of what needs to happen next. And we're still trying to figure some of that out.
Sure. So if, I mean, like, is your organization the only organization in North Carolina which deals with this developmental disabilities, or are there other organizations
There
as
are
well?
others. We have close working relationships with them. The Autism Society is one. Easter Seals United Cerebral Palsy is another. There are probably half a dozen that we interact with. We are considered by organizational standards a loose federation. The ARC is. Each chapter of the ARC is its own independent nonprofit organization. That said, we all have a similar interests and similar concerns for people with disabilities. The Autism Society focuses primarily on autism. The Down Syndrome Association focuses on Down syndrome. The ARC works with all people with all disabilities, with all ADD. And we've been around since in North Carolina since 1953. So we've been doing this for a while.
Mm-hmm. So if anyone who's listening to this, and if they want to be a part of your organization, let's say as someone who wants to be working with advocacy and policy, right? How would you recommend they should start? Is there like a sort of internship or anything which you guys have, like any sort of programs like that?
We haven't done internships. We've talked about it, mostly because we're so busy, not just covering our services. We have we do internships with some on the service side and social workers, and we bring some of those folks in. Policy, it really requires a kind of a subject matter expertise. I mean, because it is such a unique thing. I mean, if I had somebody, and I would probably give some thought to working with an intern just to focus on education policy, because education uses their own language and their own acronyms. Health and Human Services use their own language and their acronyms. Justice uses their own language, and they're very, it's like going to the podiatrist and then going to your endocrinologist and then going to your phlebotomist. Very different disciplines with different focus. They're all dealing with the same person and possibly even some of the same conditions, but in different ways and from different points of view. And that's really, there's just an awful lot always going on, and sometimes we're stretched pretty thin trying to get to it. The difficulty for anybody bringing an intern is, now I'm going to have to take time away from all these critical things to be able to help this person and focus them on some things. But it's something that we've been kicking around. We may be getting close to it. It would certainly make a difference in a couple areas if we had somebody.
Nice. So I think that's the set of questions I had as far as your career goes. Do you want to take a few minutes to speak about yourself or your organization or your future? If you have any, sort of ambition or anything like that, it's up to you.
Oh, I'm not sure. Ambition, I'm always ambitious. I want to see things move in the right direction. I like what I do. I don't replace a person with a disability in my role. What I do is augment their ability to choose and to make decisions. And that, to me, that's probably what drives me more than anything is that giving somebody that freedom to make a decision and to be able to step back, and for better or for worse. And sometimes we want them to make the right decision every time. And so we tend to, hold them up a little bit more than we should. And sometimes, in my experience, the best learning lessons I've ever had was when I screwed up and failed. And to be able to step back and say, okay, failure isn't the end of everything. It's just, let's learn from this. Now, what do we do differently the next time? And that's really at the core of what the mission of the ARC is, about securing choice and opportunities. And every element of what we do is connected to that. And that, to me, that's very satisfying. To know what it is that I'm about, and to be able to see specifically the things that I'm doing and where I'm spending my time and my energy, is that getting me closer to that ultimate goal of securing choice and opportunity. And the day that I can't say that, no, I didn't, we're not doing anything getting us closer to that, that's the day that I'll walk away. At that point, it's time to leave and let somebody else step in and see if they can make a difference.
Excellent. So that concludes the career side of it. So here's for some fun rapid fire set of questions for you. What are the 3 skills you think are essential for someone to become a good lobbyist?
Objectivity, the ability to not be partisan. My friend today may be across the table with working against me tomorrow, and my friend the day after. And so remaining very objective and not getting personal. This is not, just because you disagree with me doesn't mean that I don't like you. It's where some of the best growth comes. Objectivity, being aware of current events, and not just current events, but seeing how things that are happening, foreign and domestic, interact with things that are going on. How do all the strings attach? It's like a giant spider web. Every element of that web is connected, and you can't touch one part of the web without the entire rest of the web feeling the impact.
Awesome. So what would you be if you weren't in your current role? Let's say if you're not an executive director of the Arc of NC, if you had the choice to pick any career, any profession, or anything else.
Oh, I would probably for years since I was, probably 5th grade. I've been involved in wood shopping and woodworking and, furniture making, that just light handcraft art. It's art. That's, building things with my hands. That's probably what I would be doing.
Awesome. I think that probably answers the next question too, which was like, what is your favorite book or hobby, I guess? Who do you
woodworking is my hobby. I like reading Brandon Sanderson.
Oh, nice.
Interesting author.
Do you have any role models in your life?
Yeah, I do. I have several. My father, he turns 91 on Monday, certainly had a huge influence on me. And I have 4 sisters, and living on the farm, he's a traditional type. And usually when it came to doctoring the livestock or building fences or whatever, it was he and I, and has been for most of our lives. Certainly those times and moments, he was able to share his understanding and his philosophies. We don't agree on everything, but it's never been an angry or it's always been a pleasant relationship between the two of us, and to be able to talk about things that we don't agree about and come away with a better understanding. So my father, my boss that hired me at PSW, was and remains a huge influence on how I approach things, and several others, people that have been there in my life at critical points that pointed me in the right direction.
Excellent. Very inspiring, John. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really do appreciate you taking the time and then spending it with me.
Oh, you're welcome. I appreciate it. I enjoyed the conversation. Let's do it again sometime.
All right. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Deepak.
Thank you so much for listening to the State Lobbying Heroes podcast. Please do rate the show. We'd love to hear your feedback. Until next time, keep smiling and be safe.